Stop EACOP or East Africa Crude Oil Pipeline is a campaign that's really pushing to stop the world's longest heated crude oil pipeline once constructed. It's a 1,445 kilometer long pipeline that's going to be traversing from Hoima in Uganda all the way to the port of Tanga in Tanzania. There are a lot of concerns with the pipeline that it's coming with it. One, there are issues around environmental impacts. So we're talking about an area that has several forests, water catchment areas, people dwelling and doing agriculture and other sorts of daily livelihoods. And we also have a good number of wildlife located around the whole pipeline corridor. And if this pipeline is going to take effect, then all these impacts are going to accrue and are going to affect everyone in Uganda and Tanzania, as well as the rest of the world significantly. We also know that Uganda depends a lot on climate sensitive areas, and the pipeline is going to, once the oil is burnt or utilized, it's going to be emitting about 34 million tons of carbon every year. And that's going to be more than double of what Uganda and Tanzania are currently emitting. So this pipeline is going to exacerbate climate change and carbon emissions within the country significantly and exponentially. And what it means is that the sectors that Uganda and Tanzania depend a lot, which are climate sensitive, we're talking about agriculture, tourism, wildlife, and other sectors like fishing and others that all depend on climate. So if we're seeing more of climate disasters happening in the form of heavy rains, floods, long periods of famines and droughts, it will mean that a good number of people are going to be affected. There are also worries around, it's a very long pipeline, and what happens if you're having calamities like oil spills? What does it mean for the people of Uganda, for most of these wildlife that are found within the corridor? But also about a third of the pipeline is going to be passing through a water catchment area called the Lake Turkana water basin. And the lake, not the Lake Turkana, but the Lake Victoria. So Lake Victoria itself is a fresh water source supporting up to 40 million people found in all the three countries surrounding Lake Victoria, which is Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya. So what does it mean for these people who are only looking at the well, at the lake as the main source for fresh water? There are definitely concerns in terms of the economics of the project itself. So we do know that tourism in Uganda brings a significant good number of foreign exchange and people visiting Uganda to see forests, to see wildlife. What does it mean for these sectors once they start being impacted? Is it economically viable to invest more in these sectors like agriculture, which are employing every 7 out of 10 people in Uganda are working within the agricultural sector? Should we be investing more on fishing and finding out different ways of adding value to those resources that they're getting from that part? Or will the investment in a pipeline that everything that we've seen points to the fact that it's Total Energy, China National Offshore Oil Company, that will be pocketing all the profits of this pipeline? So is the pipeline going to support the interests of the people of Uganda and Tanzania, or really going to be supporting the interests of fossil fuel companies? So all these are issues that we are grappling with, and we're trying to get our governments to really understand, because this is not the first time that we're seeing fossil fuel projects anywhere in the world. We've seen it in Nigeria, and they've been more poor than they were resource-wise, and even the communities in those areas. And we definitely know that taking advantage of the oil doesn't always necessarily mean that it's going to make Uganda and Tanzania a richer country. So we are pushing for a more of a 360 kind of look at this project, look at the benefits and the costs, and really trying to get the government to understand that the costs of this project are going to be more than benefits, if there are any. The good thing is the pipeline is yet to take effect. Where we are so far is they're still trying to deal with the land, getting the land for the project. There are a lot of concerns and issues in terms of how people are being displaced, how they haven't been paid fair compensation, issues around free, prior, and informed consent, and people not being able to utilize their land. I'm gonna call Mama. All right. So I hope you can still going, or do I need to? Okay, awesome. So there are many environmental concerns that we have, and we've raised all of these in terms of impacts to water sources, impacts to the forests, impacts to the environment, definitely impacts to the fish and the other wildlife that are found within all these areas, and therefore we're trying to push all of this out. And our strategy has always been that it's always you stand a higher chance of stopping these projects if you do it from the onset before the construction starts, because once the money has been confirmed, it becomes even harder to stop it. So we are worried about all these environmental concerns. We've taken different ways of expressing it to the government of Uganda and Tanzania. We've definitely tried to have one-on-one and engagements with them. We've tried to reach out to them through financiers and people who are looked at to be investing in these projects, to try and push them not to commit these resources. And we've also gone to court at the East African Court of Justice to try and get an injunction so the project doesn't see the light of day. Because in all real sense, at the end of the day, it's Total Energy and CNOOC that are making all the money. And both the governments of Tanzania and Uganda will be having a huge cost burden to deal with in terms of the health impacts that are coming from the project, the climate change consequences that we're talking about, because it's costing climate change, especially for Uganda and the East African region. It's costing us both lives and money. They've been affected in many ways, and I'm not sure I'll get all of them, but some of the ones that come on the top of my mind, one is the displacement from their land. So the way, and I think this is the model that works in almost all the jurisdictions I've looked at globally. These projects are termed as public projects. And what it means is you rarely have a say of whether you give up your land for the pipeline or not. And what this meant for Ugandans was that they were told this is the route that the pipeline will come through. And it's affecting more than 300 villages all through the corridor. And the governments have been moved really quickly to try and get the land for the pipeline. And this has meant now people rarely have a say of whether you sell your land or not. So you are forced to sell. The only thing you could do is maybe challenge the compensation that you're given. And those who have agreed for the compensation have been given the money, which is really peanuts, so to speak. I remember they were saying it's about 30,000 Ugandan shillings, which is about 1,000 Kenya shillings. That's about $10 for an acre, which is really, it doesn't make any sense to me. And for those who have raised any issues with the compensation or issues, they are still out of their land, and they've not yet been given any money. And if you are a bit active and pushing against them and rubbing people the wrong way, There've also been some security threats for the community and some of our community partners there. So we've had arrests of people. We've had organizations being threatened to lose their licenses to continue working as organizations in Uganda. And recently, about 6 of our colleagues were actually arrested on a Friday. And they stayed all through the weekend and were only like allowed out on bail on a Monday afternoon after pushing and doing a lot of pressure around the issue. So it's like you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, because it's really worrying for them. Another way that the community has been affected will definitely be the livelihoods that they depend within the whole corridor. So we have a good number of them that are doing agriculture. As I had said, about every 7 in 10 people are working within the agricultural sector. And what this means is if this project goes through, then it means these people won't be able to continue with this livelihood that they're used to, which now has a ripple effect to their lives, because it's what they depend for to get bread on the table for their families, to take their kids to school, and do all the different things that you need to do to continue to sustain yourself. There is definitely the issue around other livelihoods like fishermen who might also be affected. But then there's also the forestry. So there are, I think, about 2 or 3 forests that are going to be affected within the whole corridor, which are rich in different species found within the whole corridor. So once we have the pipeline, this is going to affect that sector really significantly. And tourism and wildlife is one of the reasons why a lot of people visit Uganda. So tourism attracts, I think, the most foreign revenue for the country than any other commodity. So that's going to really affect them significantly, not just the community who depend on it as their livelihood, but also for the government, who get a lot of taxation from that process. So those are the 3 things that I wanted to mention. 1, the livelihoods that are being affected. 2, their security, because if you are actively speaking up against the project, you can find yourself arrested. And thirdly, it's about their health and sustainability for their families. Currently, we definitely try to do a lot of working with the community partners as the lead, yeah? So amplifying what they're doing and their interest. But I find myself utilizing a lot of my time to support actions around, 1, trying to push for different financial banks and entities not to commit money for the construction of the pipeline, because we know if the money is not there, the pipeline won't be built, even if they have all the licenses that they need to continue with the project. And I also do quite a bit of work around pushing for insurance companies as well, who we've known to have supported Total, or at least done or have done underwriting on fossil fuel projects, to make them to commit not to provide insurance for this project. Those are the 2 that I've been doing, but most of the time has really been about supporting the community partners in either amplifying the work that they're doing. Sometimes it's really about trying to get them to be released on bail after they've been arrested. But other than that, I would say the other strategy that we're really pushing, or the focus that we're really pushing right now, is try to connect the dots between the impacts of the project, but also providing an alternative model that we have. So if the governments of Uganda and Tanzania were really keen about improving their economies and improving the people of these countries, what could they do as an alternative to the pipeline, which will still bring the same, if not more, revenue, but also not have the impacts that we no will accrue once the pipeline is operational. I've always said this, but it's always important to repeat it. One, we need to stop thinking as fossil fuel projects as working in silos or like, operating in vacuums, and start looking at the world as a global village or a small village, because that project happening in Uganda and the pipeline going through from Uganda to Tanzania, it's not just a threat for Uganda and Tanzania, it's a threat for the whole world, because the carbon emissions we're talking about, and also the precedent that we are making, because if it happens in Uganda, what justification do we have to say it should not happen in South Africa, or it should not happen in Egypt, or it should not happen in Europe, if we are happy for it to happen elsewhere? And two, it's the fact that while we're seeing a very strong push within Europe and the West against fossil fuels, and we're seeing it really taking shape, and more of the companies are now looking for other frontiers to go and continue the work. So if it happens in Africa, because they're looking at Africa as easy because the laws are more draconian and less progressive, it's easier to convince the governments to accept a project that it's for the public interest, and they know that they do not have to adhere to stronger environmental guidelines or safeguards. So what this means is all the energy and successes we've had in Europe and in the West will be wasted if now the same projects are being moved elsewhere and being done in Africa. So it's important that we push for fossil fuels, against fossil fuels anywhere in the world. And my argument is that these people are using pension funds from, taxpayers in Europe and the West to be investing in fossil fuel projects elsewhere. So it's your time to convince and really be involved in pushing and making sure that your money that you've worked really hard for is not being utilized in a way that's affecting others. And definitely at the end of it, you are also protecting your future, yeah? Because we're seeing an even bigger risk of fossil fuel projects ending up as stranded assets. And if this is your money that's financing these projects, it will actually mean that your future, which most of you have worked so hard for, is at risk.